Hello again everybody, Nick here, and last week we talked about altitude training and we went into depth about how it helped me as a professional runner, how I implemented it through the majority of my pro running career, and how I think you could add it to your training to ultimately make major improvements. Now, I did get a ton of follow-up questions because altitude is kind of complex. Questions like who should use it? Is it good for sprinters? What about altitude masks and altitude tents? Just so many great follow-up questions. I thought it was only appropriate to do a follow-up video where we go into depth on kind of all of the different nitty-gritty nuanced aspects of altitude training. So that's what we're going to do in this video. I'm going to call it the who, what, when, where, why, and how of altitude training. But before we get into that, I do want to let you guys know it is Black Friday week and my company Run Gum has something special planned for you guys. They call it the Nick Symmonds bundle. I love this. It is an autographed box of Run Gum variety. It's wintergreen, my favorite flavor, 12-pack of Run Gum wintergreen, plus our newest product, Run Gum Immunity, which is a boost for your immune system, and last but not least, this awesome fleecy headband from Run Gum. Now, normally if you bought each individual item, it would cost over $75, but because it's Black Friday week and we discount everything heavily, you get all of that for less than $50. I will link that in the description below. But today we are here to talk about altitude training, and again, the more nuanced approaches to altitude training, or rather, the nitty-gritty of altitude training. So as I mentioned before, let's start with the who. Who should be using altitude training? I really think it's for middle distance and distance runners primarily. I have seen sprinters go to altitude, but it really actually has the opposite effect for sprinters. Now let me explain why. Sprinters, though, they will continue to build red blood cells while they're at altitude, of course, just like everybody else. Running through the air at those speeds is actually the exact opposite of what you really want when you're training, because the air's so thin, they can move faster through that air. It's a reason why you can't set a world record in a sprint event above 1,000 meters. It's also a reason why speed skaters perform better at altitude. If you're moving really fast, the density of the air really comes into play. So the people that really benefit from altitude training are people that are going to be in a more aerobic event, like the 800 and up. So as an 800 meter runner, I felt that me and my colleagues kind of went into two different camps. People who really benefited from altitude, like this guy, and 800 meter runners who really didn't benefit from it as much, and maybe would not even use altitude training. And there's nothing wrong with that. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. But almost every 5K, 10K marathoner I know, almost all of them use altitude training at some point. So that's the who. Next, consult my notes here. The what. The what is the altitude training, you guys. Living and training at altitude, and by that I mean, 6, 7, 8,000 feet and higher. That is the what. I'm not talking about an altitude mask, which I think are absolute gimmicks and should not be used. I'm also not talking about altitude tents, which I have tried for myself. Now let me go back to talk about altitude masks and altitude tents and why I don't love them. Now, for the mask, the most important part about altitude training is that you're there for, 23 or 24 hours a day. You're benefiting not just from the actual workout, you're benefiting from living there and breathing that thin air 23 or 24 hours a day. Now I say 23 potentially because you may be doing the philosophy of live high, train low, which I love. And it just goes to reinforce the fact that you want to train with oxygen in your lungs and you want to spend the majority of the day with less oxygen. So using an altitude mask is the exact opposite of that. It's robbing your body of oxygen when you're training, which is not what you want, and then you go right back to sea level when you take the mask off, which is again the exact opposite of what you want. So I really dislike altitude masks. Now the altitude tent is different, right? Because this concept is exactly what I'm describing. What if you could live in an oxygen-deprived environment inside an oxygen tent and train at sea level? Well, that's exactly what the tent allows for. However, how many of us are willing to spend 14, 16, even 20 hours a day inside a tiny little tent that I can tell you from personal experience is humid, is mildewy, it's loud, it's hard to sleep in? To really benefit from altitude, you need to be spending most of your conscious and unconscious hours there. And I'm just not willing to spend 16 plus hours a day inside one of these, little nasty tents. So while I think that, if you did what Nike did and you depressurize an entire, not depressurize, but you scrub out the oxygen of an entire house, they actually did this. That's a little bit more enjoyable, but I still don't want to spend 16 plus hours a day inside that house. So for me, for quality of life, for enjoyment, for seeing the world, the what is living, training, sleeping, being at altitude for an extended period of time. So that leaves me into the when. When I say extended period of time, again, I'm not talking about being there full time, although there are people that live at full time, and we'll get to that. But if you live at sea level like the majority of us do, going to altitude for anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, that seems to be the sweet spot. Now, a lot of you do live at altitude, and you're asking me, well, what if I live at altitude? Well, if you live at mild altitude, let's say Denver, 5,280 feet, going up to live at 8,000 or 9,000 feet, maybe you go up to Leadville at 10,000 for 4 to 6 weeks. I think that does have a huge benefit. If you're living at 2,000 or 3,000 feet and you want to bounce up to 5, I don't think that's going to do a lot of good. I really think you need to have a noticeable delta between your baseline where you live and that 4 to 6 weeks that you spend at altitude. When also factors into what your season looks like. Now, the average red blood cell is going to live in your body for about 6 to 8 weeks. So all those red blood cells that you accumulate while you're at altitude, those are going to have a tremendous effect for the immediate 6 to 8 weeks following your return to sea level. So for me, I knew that the heart of my pro racing season was, May, June, July into August. So almost without fail, I would go up at the end of March or early April to altitude, and I mentioned last week where I like to train, and we'll actually get to where next, but I would go up and I would spend that 4 to 6 weeks kind of right before my Rust Buster, my season opener. So maybe I would go to Flagstaff April 1, I'd spend 5 weeks there, and then mid-May I'd maybe even fly directly to an all-out mile. And I would use that mile as a Rust Buster, knowing that my legs weren't going to be sharp, that I was going to hurt like crazy, but that I had just built up all of this, strength and red blood cells, and I could really crack a good mile. And then from there, I would, spend 3 or 4 weeks just really hammering great workouts. So that's kind of the when I like to use altitude, and occasionally even we would supplement that with littler trips. Maybe in the summer we'd go to Font Romeu or some other, lower altitude areas in Europe to kind of like boost that back up for a little while. The where I just kind of mentioned, Font Romeu, what a great place to train when you're in the south of France. Elevation's a little bit lower, I want to say, the 5,000 to 6,000 foot range. I'm not going to get into Europe training too much because most of the time I was at sea level when I was in Europe. But here in America, or here in North America, I have done a lot of altitude training. I've trained in Bozeman, Boulder, Denver, Albuquerque, Flagstaff, Toluca, San Luis Potosi. I love altitude training, and not just because I like spending time at altitude building those red blood cells. I just genuinely love being at altitude. The air's dry, it's crisp and cool. Typically these places have nice climates, like going to Flagstaff, even in the middle of winter, it was still usually sunny and warm. And so a lot of times I felt like I could skip some of those nastier spring months here in Oregon and go to some of these beautiful locations. If you're new to altitude training and you're not excited about going to Toluca, Mexico, which we talked about last week, which is at almost 9,000 feet, if you want to dip your toes in, I think Boulder, Denver, Colorado Springs are all great locations. Albuquerque, maybe for beginners, might be the best option because it's relatively low. You have the option to sleep high in the Sandia Mountains and train low in the valley. And it's a big city, so there's a lot of restaurants and concerts. Well, there used to be concerts before the pandemic. There's a lot of fun things to do. So if it was me, if it was my first time going to altitude, I would probably choose Albuquerque. If I'm a more seasoned, altitude veteran, I know what I'm looking for. I don't think you can beat Flagstaff in America. And for the more adventurous types, Central Mexico is unbeatable from a cultural experience, weather. I love Mexico for the food, the people, the training. It was phenomenal. Now let's talk about the why. And I kind of just dipped my toes into that one. Why not? Like, what could be better than going to a beautiful location with beautiful trails and wonderful people and spending 4 to 6 weeks going all in on trying to become the best runner you can be? I love altitude training camps for 2 reasons. Not just because you're at altitude and you're building all that strength in those red blood cells. I love it because it is a distraction-free zone. I don't have to worry about going into work. I don't have to worry, about social events. Like the romanticized idea of living in a cabin in the woods is exactly what you're doing when you're at altitude camp. And it was truly a 4 to 6 week chunk of time where I was even more so than usual able to eliminate all distractions and put 100% of my time and energy and focus into doing exactly what I wanted to do, and that was be the best runner that I could be. Now, the how, a little harder, right? I was a professional runner, so I was being paid to train full-time. I was being paid to eliminate distractions. A lot of you have school, or a lot of you have jobs, and you can't necessarily just peace out for 4 to 6 weeks to go to altitude. Or can you, right? If you're a student, go during your summer break. That's exactly what I did between my junior and senior year of college to become a world-class athlete. If you have a part-time job, or if you have a full-time job, save up your PTO, or take unpaid time off. Or during the pandemic right now, if you can work remotely, there has never been a better time to go experiment with something like an altitude camp. So I know it can be hard. I know you're going to have to make sacrifices, but anything worth doing, is worth doing right and is worth making sacrifices for. So the how of how you're going to do it, save up the money. There are ways to do it more affordably than others. I mentioned that I spent 10 weeks at altitude in Toluca, Mexico as a broke college kid. 10 weeks on $1,000 budget, and I lived like a king down there, or at least I felt like I was living like a king. So no excuses. If this is your dream, make sacrifices and make it happen. That's kind of the advanced topics when it comes to altitude. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I have spent a lot of time above 10,000 feet, above 14,000 feet even. This thumbnail that you saw, I'll link it, I'll put it right here. That was me on top of Mount Kilimanjaro, 19,000+ feet. You don't need to be doing that. There are diminishing returns. I think, again, I'm going to reiterate, that 6,000 to 8,000 foot sweet spot seems to be exactly what mid-distance and long-distance runners like. There are diminishing returns if you go higher, because even though it's more challenging and you're building red blood cells, you can't go as fast, and you lose some of that fast twitch, ability to turn over that even marathoners do need to have. So I don't believe that being above, say, 10,000 feet really has much benefits for you at all. That's a wrap on all the knowledge that I have. If you guys have any knowledge that you'd like to add, please do so in the comments below. I read most of them, and it's been super helpful to see your questions with regards to altitude, and I'm glad that I was able to pass along some of the knowledge that I picked up over 12+ years of training at altitude as a pro. I have partnered with Running Warehouse to give away a pair of shoes. We've done this now for, I want to say, almost 12 weeks, and we've got at least another 4 weeks to go. If you want to enter in for a chance to win a pair of shoes, all you have to do is follow me and Running Warehouse on Instagram. I'll link both those handles right here. But let's pick a winner. All right, I do pick these at random, and today's winner is Hey Hollywood. Her name's Christina, and it looks like she loves to run distance and including marathons, so she could use a new pair of shoes. This is awesome. I hope that helped you guys out. I will have another video coming out next week that I think you really like. I'm thankful for you guys, and I wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving week.